Hi, welcome back to the Snipe Museum of Art. My name is Joe Becker and I'm honored to serve as your director. Today I thought we'd spend some time in our galleries where our African collection is displayed. It's one of the most recently renovated parts of the museum and certainly attracts a great number of visitors. To say a few things about African art, I think that there are a few very important reminders. Number one, when we talk about Africa, we're really talking about a whole continent. We're talking about dozens and dozens of different groups of people, different artists, different styles. So there's nothing singular about African art, just as there's nothing singular necessarily about European art. The museum world embraced African art relatively recently. As early as the 18th century, there were Europeans in Africa bringing back curiosities. Then, in the 19th century, the French, the Belgians, the English, the British, and to a degree, the Germans began collecting more in earnest. However, oftentimes these were thought about as ethnographic collections, not necessarily fine art collections as we think about them today. Sometimes they were even referred to as collections of primitive art. Interestingly enough, it wasn't until the early 20th century, and not from the museum world or the academic world, but from artists, that the interest in African art burgeoned. Individuals like Leminck, Matisse, Picasso, Braque, Modigliani were very enthusiastic about African art. They saw something in the forms, regardless of the individual makers, that was interesting and new and expressive, and it greatly informed their art. By the 1920s, there were many African galleries in Europe and a few even in the United States. Museums began to show African art across the United States and in Europe, and eventually it led to the fact that most major museums, like the Snipe Museum of Art, developed an important collection. Ours really began in the 1960s. So let me take a step out of the way and let you enjoy the gallery for a few minutes. We'll come back here towards the end, but I want to take you downstairs and show you a few things from our collection as well. Thanks for joining me downstairs. I thought you'd appreciate an opportunity to see another one of the vaults here at the museum. In this area, we have a great number of the objects that aren't on display from our African collection being preserved for their longevity. Looking at the African collection, we really have an opportunity to think about the role of a museum in general. Yes, we collect, but we also have an obligation to preserve and to protect, to research, to interpret, to present, and ultimately to enjoy. These are three objects that I enjoy very much, and they also help us understand the breadth and the depth of the collection. They are representations of chihuahua, antelopes, one more horizontal, two, a pair, including this little baby, are much more upright. They're by the Bamana or Bambara people of West Africa. In the past, I've been able to share with you there are about 30,000 objects in the entire permanent collection here at the museum. Specific to Africa, there are about 1,500 objects, and at any time we have about 5% of them on display somewhere here at the museum, which is a little bit higher than the national average. We make these collections also available to scholars, to classes, to faculty, to come in, to study, to research, and help us understand the objects better. One of the fascinating things about this collection, and these objects in particular, is it really represents the kind of time dimensions of the collection. This piece in front of me is from the early 1960s when it was brought into the collection. These over at the left-hand side were accessioned in 2017. So we're really talking about 50 years to build such an important and lasting collection. One name that I'll reintroduce when we go back upstairs into the galleries is Owen Mort. Mr. Mort was extremely generous through the guidance of Chuck Loving, my predecessor here at the museum, and gave more than 1,000 objects to the museum. Many of them are on permanent display. Others are down here preserved for scholars and classes in the future. So now that you had a chance to take a peek downstairs and see just an aspect of our collection and maybe understand what we do a little bit more clearly, let's go upstairs and take a look at 3 objects. Now that we're back up here in the gallery, I wanted to share with you, as I mentioned, 3 important aspects of this installation. The first will be important when we look at this elephant mask from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let me step out of the way so you can appreciate it more fully. You might be noticing that in this gallery space, almost everything is covered in a plexiglass vitrine. Yes, it is for the protection of the objects, but it's also very much related to the objects with which many of these objects have been made. You'll notice that there are a variety of natural materials: shells, animal skin, wood, raffia, or grass, and a variety of glass beads. These vitrines help to protect the objects and give them a longer life. One of the most fascinating things about this elephant mask is the way that it has come down to us in such great condition. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The way that the individual beads have been placed, the way that the shells have been sewn in is meticulous. We very much appreciate the artist, even though we don't know the artist by name. So if you go into a gallery such as this and you're wondering why is everything under glass, as it were, one of the main reasons is to protect the fragility of the materials so that we have such an object to appreciate for generations. Now let's step around the back and see something also quite extraordinary. Second work that I wanted to share with you, because I think it's so important to understand African art in this installation, is this Egungun masquerade costume. It's actually one of 2 that we're so fortunate to have as a part of the permanent collection. It was made by the Yoruba people. If you start out at the very top, you can see that there is a carved face, but then coming down in the neck, midsection, the torso, all the way down to the bottom, are layers and layers and layers of cloth. Yes, that idea of fragility and that idea of natural materials that we mentioned with the elephant mask is at play. But I wanted to point out something so significant about African art. The majority of these objects were at one time used. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that separates a museum quality object from something that you might buy if you were traveling as a tourist. In fact, imagine someone inside of this masquerade costume. There's something of a little mesh area towards the center. In the masquerade, someone twirls and twirls and twirls so that all of those elements of cloth fly through the air. They create a breeze. And, according to the tradition of the Yoruba, those people that feel the breeze are blessed. So in this instance, we're talking about not just the importance of understanding African art in terms of materials, but also in terms of function. This piece has been a wonderful gift to us from the Charles Hayes family. The third and final piece that I wanted to share with you is this horse and rider. It's actually a marionette or a puppet, and it is like the chihuahua that we saw downstairs, also by the Bamana or the Bambara people. I wanted to conclude with this piece because in many ways it summarizes our little visit today. Number one, it's under protection here because it's made of natural materials. You can see that it's made of wood and cloth. So it might remind you of what we talked about with the elephant mask. Number two, it was intended to be used in performances, so it might remind you of the idea of function and performance, just like the Egungun mask. But I wanted to come back to it, and I wanted to talk about it in just one very special way. This is one of the many objects from the Mort collection. Donors are so very significant. Collectors are very significant to any museum. They certainly have been for generations here at the University of Notre Dame. The Mort collection greatly expanded our holdings of African art and made it truly a great collection. We're forever grateful to Mr. Mort, but we're also grateful to my predecessor, Chuck Loving, for bringing Mr. Mort and this collection here to the university. My hope is that you can join us here very soon at the museum, and next time you're here, give yourself some time to enjoy this very special collection. Take care.